The Divine Institutes by Lactantius, Book 1. Men of great and distinguished talent, when they had entirely devoted themselves to learning, holding in contempt all actions both private and public, applied to the pursuit of investigating the truth whatever labor could be bestowed upon it, thinking it much more excellent to investigate and know the method of human and divine things than to be entirely occupied with the heaping up of riches or the accumulation of honors. For no one can be made better or more just by these things, since they are frail and earthly and pertain to the adorning of the body only. Those men were indeed most deserving of the knowledge of the truth, which they so greatly desired to know, that they even preferred it to all things. For it is plain that some gave up their property and altogether abandoned the pursuit of pleasures, that being disengaged and without impediment, they might follow the simple truth, and it alone. And so greatly did the name and authority of the truth prevail with them, that they proclaimed that the reward of the greatest good was contained in it. But they did not obtain the object of their wish, and at the same time lost their labor and industry, because the truth, that is the secret of the Most High God, who created all things, cannot be attained by our own ability and perceptions. Otherwise, there would be no difference between God and man, if human thought could reach to the counsels and arrangements of that eternal majesty. And because it was impossible that the divine method of procedure should become known to man by his own efforts, God did not suffer man any longer to err in search of the light of wisdom and to wander through inextricable darkness without any result of his labor, but at length opened his eyes and made the investigation of the truth, his own gift, so that he might show the nothingness of human wisdom and point out to man wandering in error the way of obtaining immortality. But since few make use of this heavenly benefit and gift, because the truth lies hidden, veiled in obscurity, and it is either an object of contempt to the learned, because it has not suitable defenders, or is hated by the unlearned on account of its natural severity, which the nature of men inclined to vices cannot endure. For because there is a bitterness mingled with virtues, while vices are seasoned with pleasure, offended by the former and soothed by the latter, they are born headlong and deceived by the appearance of good things. They embrace evils for goods. I have believed that these errors should be encountered, that both the learned may be directed to true wisdom and the unlearned to true religion. And this profession is to be thought much better, more useful and glorious than that of oratory, in which being long engaged we trained young men not to virtue, but altogether to cunning wickedness. Certainly we shall now much more rightly discuss respecting the heavenly precepts, by which we may be able to instruct the minds of men to the worship of the true majesty. Nor does he deserve so well respecting the affairs of men, who imparts the knowledge of speaking well, as he who teaches men to live in piety and innocence. On which account the philosophers were in greater glory among the Greeks than the orators. For they, the philosophers, were considered teachers of right living, which is far more excellent, since to speak well belongs only to a few, but to live well belongs to all. Yet that practice in fictitious suits has been of great advantage to us, so that we are now able to plead the cause of truth with greater copiousness and ability of speaking. For although the truth may be defended without eloquence, as it often has been defended by many, yet it needs to be explained and in a measure discussed with distinctness and elegance of speech, in order that it may flow with greater power into the minds of men, being both provided with its own force and adorned with the brilliancy of speech. We undertake, therefore, to discuss religion and divine things. For if some of the greatest orators, veterans as it were of their profession, having completed the works of their pleadings, at last gave themselves up to philosophy, and regarded that as a most just rest from their labors, if they tortured their minds in the investigation of those things which could not be found out, so that they appear to have sought for themselves not so much leisure as occupation, and that indeed with much greater trouble than in their former pursuit. How much more justly shall I betake myself as to a most safe harbour, to that pious, true and divine wisdom, in which all things are ready for utterance, pleasant to the hearing, easy to be understood, honourable to be undertaken. And if some skilful men and arbiters of justice composed and published institutions of civil law, by which they might lull the strifes and contentions of discordant citizens, how much better and more rightly shall we follow up in writing the divine institutions, in which we shall not speak about rain droppings, or the turning of waters, or the preferring of claims, but we shall speak of hope, of life, of salvation, of immortality, and of God, that we may put an end to deadly superstitions and most disgraceful errors. And we now commence this work under the auspices of your name, O mighty Emperor Constantine, who were the first of the Roman princes to repudiate errors, and to acknowledge and honor the majesty of the one and only true God. For when that most happy day had shone upon the world, in which the Most High God raised you to the prosperous height of power, you entered upon a dominion which was salutary and desirable for all, with an excellent beginning, when restoring justice which had been overthrown and taken away, you expiated the most shameful deed of others. In return for which action God will grant to you happiness, virtue, and length of days, that even when old you may govern the state with the same justice with which you began in youth, and may hand down to your children the guardianship of the Roman name as you yourself received it from your father. For to the wicked, who still rage against the righteous in other parts of the world, the Omnipotent will also repay the reward of their wickedness with a severity proportioned to its tardiness. For as he is a most indulgent father towards the godly, so is he a most upright judge against the ungodly. And in my desire to defend his religion and divine worship, to whom can I rather appeal, whom can I address, but him by whom justice and wisdom have been restored to the affairs of men? Therefore, leaving the authors of this earthly philosophy who bring forward nothing certain, let us approach the right path. For if I considered these to be sufficiently suitable guides to a good life, I would both follow them myself and exhort others to follow them. But since they disagree among one another with great contention, and are for the most part at variance with themselves, it is evident that their path is by no means straightforward, since they have severally marked out distinct ways for themselves according to their own will, and have left great confusion to those who are seeking for the truth. But since the truth is revealed from heaven to us, who have received the mystery of true religion, and since we follow God, the teacher of wisdom and the guide to truth, we call together all, without any distinction either of sex or of age, to heavenly pasture. For there is no more pleasant food for the soul than the knowledge of truth, to the maintaining and explaining of which we have destined 7 books, although the subject is one of almost boundless and immeasurable labor, so that if anyone should wish to dilate upon and follow up these things to their full extent, he would have such an exuberant supply of subjects that neither books would find any limit, nor speech any end. But on this account we will put together all things briefly, because those things which we are about to bring forward are so plain and lucid that it seems to be more wonderful that the truth appears so obscure to men, and to those especially who are commonly esteemed wise, or because men will only need to be trained by us, that is, to be recalled from the error in which they are entangled to a better course of life. And if, as I hope, we shall attain to this, we will send them to the very fountain of learning, which is most rich and abundant, by copious draughts of which they may appease the thirst conceived within and quench their ardor. And all things will be easy, ready of accomplishment and clear to them, if only they are not annoyed at applying patience in reading or hearing to the perception of the discipline of wisdom. For many, pertinaciously adhering to vain superstitions, harden themselves against the manifest truth, not so much deserving well of their religions, which they wrongly maintain, as they deserve ill of themselves, who, when they have a straight path, seek devious windings, who leave the level ground that they may glide over a precipice, who leave the light, that blind and enfeebled they may lie in darkness. We must provide for these, that they may not fight against themselves, and that they may be willing at length to be freed from inveterate errors. And this they will assuredly do, if they shall at any time see for what purpose they were born. For this is the cause of their perverseness, namely, ignorance of themselves. And if anyone, having gained the knowledge of the truth, shall have shaken off this ignorance, he will know to what object his life is to be directed, and how it is to be spent. And I thus briefly define the sum of this knowledge, that neither is any religion to be undertaken without wisdom, nor any wisdom to be approved of without religion. Having therefore undertaken the office of explaining the truth, I did not think it so necessary to take my commencement from that inquiry which naturally seems the first, whether there is a providence which consults for all things, or all things were either made or are governed by chance, which sentiment was introduced by Democritus and confirmed by Epicurus. But before them, what did Protagoras effect, who raised doubts respecting the gods, or Diagoras afterwards, who excluded them, and some others, who did not hold the existence of gods, except that there was supposed to be no providence. These, however, were most vigorously opposed by the other philosophers, and especially by the Stoics, who taught that the universe could neither have been made without divine intelligence, nor continue to exist unless it were governed by the highest intelligence. But even Marcus Tullius, although he was a defender of the academic system, discussed at length and on many occasions respecting the providence which governs affairs, confirming the arguments of the Stoics and himself adducing many new ones. And this he does both in all the books of his own philosophy and especially in those which treat of the nature of the gods. And it was no difficult task indeed to refute the falsehoods of a few men who entertained perverse sentiments by the testimony of communities and tribes, who on this one point had no disagreement. For there is no one so uncivilized and of such an uncultivated disposition who, when he raises his eyes to heaven, although he knows not by the providence of what God all this visible universe is governed, does not understand from the very magnitude of the objects, from their motion, arrangement, constancy, usefulness, beauty, and temperament, that there is some providence, and that that which exists with wonderful method must have been prepared by some greater intelligence. And for us, assuredly, it is very easy to follow up this part as copiously as it may please us. But because the subject has been much agitated among philosophers, and they who take away providence appear to have been sufficiently answered by men of sagacity and eloquence, and because it is necessary to speak in different places throughout this work which we have undertaken, respecting the skill of the divine providence, let us for the present omit this inquiry, which is so closely connected with the other questions that it seems possible for us to discuss no subject without at the same time discussing the subject of providence. Let the commencement of our work therefore be that inquiry which closely follows and is connected with the first, whether the universe is governed by the power of one God or of many. There is no one who possesses intelligence and uses reflection who does not understand that it is one being who both created all things and governs them with the same energy by which he created them. For what need is there of many to sustain the government of the universe? Unless we should happen to think that, if there were more than one, each would possess less might and strength. And they who hold that there are many gods do indeed effect this. For those gods must of necessity be weak, since individually, without the aid of the others, they would be unable to sustain the government of so vast a mass. But God, who is the eternal mind, is undoubtedly of excellence, complete and perfect in every part. And if this is true, he must of necessity be one. For power or excellence which is complete retains its own peculiar stability. But that is to be regarded as solid, from which nothing can be taken away, that as perfect, to which nothing can be added. Who can doubt that he would be a most powerful king who should have the government of the whole world, and not without reason, since all things which everywhere exist would belong to him, since all resources from all quarters would be centered in him alone. But if more than one divide the government of the world, undoubtedly each will have less power and strength, since everyone must confine himself within his prescribed portion. In the same manner also, if there are more gods than one, they will be of less weight, others having in themselves the same power. But the nature of excellence admits of greater perfection in him in whom the whole is, than in him in whom there is only a small part of the whole. But God, if he is perfect as he ought to be, cannot but be one, because he is perfect, so that all things may be in him. Therefore the excellences and powers of the gods must necessarily be weaker, because so much will be wanting to each as shall be in the others. And so the more there are, so much the less powerful will they be. Why should I mention that this highest power and divine energy is altogether incapable of division? For whatever is capable of division must of necessity be liable to destruction also. But if destruction is far removed from God, because he is incorruptible and eternal, it follows that the divine power is incapable of division. Therefore God is one, if that which admits of so great power can be nothing else. And yet those who deem that there are many gods say that they have divided their functions among themselves, but we will discuss all these matters at their proper places. In the meantime, I affirm this, which belongs to the present subject. If they have divided their functions among themselves, the matter comes back to the same point, that any one of them is unable to supply the place of all. He cannot then be perfect who is unable to govern all things while the others are unemployed. And so it comes to pass that for the government of the universe there is more need of the perfect excellence of one than of the imperfect powers of many. But he who imagines that so great a magnitude as this cannot be governed by one being is deceived. For he does not comprehend how great are the might and power of the divine majesty if he thinks that the one God who had power to create the universe is also unable to govern that which he has created. But if he conceives in his mind how great is the immensity of that divine work, when before it was nothing, yet that by the power and wisdom of God it was made out of nothing, a work which could only be commenced and accomplished by one, he will now understand that that which has been established by one is much more easily governed by one. Someone may perhaps say that so immense a work as that of the universe could not even have been fabricated except by many. But however many and however great he may consider them, whatever magnitude, power, excellence and majesty he may attribute to the many, the whole of that I assign to one, and say that it exists in one, so that there is in him such an amount of these properties as can neither be conceived nor expressed. And since we fail in this subject, both in perception and in words, for neither does the human breast admit the light of so great understanding, nor is the mortal tongue capable of explaining such great subjects, it is right that we should understand and say this very same thing. I see again what can be alleged on the other hand, that those many gods are such as we hold the one God to be, but this cannot possibly be so, because the power of these gods individually will not be able to proceed further, the power of the others meeting and hindering them. For either each must be unable to pass beyond his own limits, or if he shall have passed beyond them, he must drive another from his boundaries. They who believe that there are many gods do not see that it may happen that some may be opposed to others in their wishes, from which circumstance disputing and contention would arise among them. As Homer represented the gods at war among themselves, since some desired that Troy should be taken, others opposed it. The universe, therefore, must be ruled by the will of one. For unless the power over the separate parts be referred to one and the same providence, the whole itself will not be able to exist, since each takes care of nothing beyond that which belongs peculiarly to him, just as warfare could not be carried on without one general and commander. But if there were in one army as many generals as there are legions, cohorts, divisions and squadrons, first of all it would not be possible for the army to be drawn out in battle array, since each would refuse the peril. Nor could it easily be governed or controlled, because all would use their own peculiar counsels, by the diversity of which they would inflict more injury than they would confer advantage. So, in this government of the affairs of nature, unless there shall be one to whom the care of the whole is referred, all things will be dissolved and fall to decay. But to say that the universe is governed by the will of many is equivalent to a declaration that there are many minds in one body, since there are many and various offices of the members, so that separate minds may be supposed to govern separate senses, and also the many affections by which we are accustomed to be moved either to anger, or to desire, or to joy, or to fear, or to pity, so that in all these affections as many minds may be supposed to operate. And if anyone should say this, he would appear to be destitute even of that very mind, which is one. But if in one body one mind possesses the government of so many things, and is at the same time occupied with the whole, why should anyone suppose that the universe cannot be governed by one, but that it can be governed by more than one? And because those maintainers of many gods are aware of this, they say that they so preside over separate offices and parts, that there is still one chief ruler. The others, therefore, on this principle, will not be gods, but attendants and ministers, whom that one most mighty and omnipotent appointed to these offices, and they themselves will be subservient to his authority and command. If, therefore, all are not equal to one another, all are not gods, for that which serves and that which rules cannot be the same. For if God is a title of the highest power, he must be incorruptible, perfect, incapable of suffering, and subject to no other being. Therefore they are not gods whom necessity compels to obey the one greatest God. But because they who hold this opinion are not deceived without cause, we will presently lay open the cause of this error. Now let us prove by testimonies the unity of the divine power. The prophets, who were very many, proclaim and declare the one God, for being filled with the inspiration of the one God, they predicted things to come with agreeing and harmonious voice. But those who are ignorant of the truth do not think that these prophets are to be believed, for they say that those voices are not divine, but human. Forsooth, because they proclaim one God, they were either madmen or deceivers. But truly, we see that their predictions have been fulfilled and are in course of fulfillment daily, and their foresight, agreeing as it does to one opinion, teaches that they were not under the impulse of madness. For who possessed of a frenzied mind would be able, I do not say to predict the future, but even to speak coherently? Were they therefore who spoke such things deceitful? What was so utterly foreign to their nature as a system of deceit, when they themselves restrained others from all fraud? For to this end were they sent by God, that they should both be heralds of his majesty and correctors of the wickedness of man. Moreover, the inclination to feign and speak falsely belongs to those who covet riches and eagerly desire gains, a disposition which was far removed from those holy men. For they so discharged the office entrusted to them that, disregarding all things necessary for the maintenance of life, they were so far from laying up store for the future that they did not even labor for the day, content with the unstored food which God had supplied. And these not only had no gains, but even endured torments and death. For the precepts of righteousness are distasteful to the wicked, and to those who lead an unholy life. Wherefore they, whose sins were brought to light and forbidden, most cruelly tortured and slew them. They, therefore, who had no desire for gain, had neither the inclination nor the motive for deceit. Why should I say that some of them were princes, or even kings, upon whom the suspicion of covetousness and fraud could not possibly fall? And yet they proclaimed the one God with the same prophetic foresight as the others. But let us leave the testimony of prophets, lest a proof derived from those who are universally disbelieved should appear insufficient. Let us come to authors, and for the demonstration of the truth, let us cite as witnesses those very persons whom they are accustomed to make use of against us. I mean poets and philosophers. From these we cannot fail in proving the unity of God, not that they had ascertained the truth, but that the force of the truth itself is so great that no one can be so blind as not to see the divine brightness presenting itself to his eyes. The poets, therefore, however much they adorned the gods in their poems and amplified their exploits with the highest praises, yet very frequently confess that all things are held together and governed by one spirit or mind. Orpheus, who is the most ancient of the poets, and coeval with the gods themselves, since it is reported that he sailed among the Argonauts together with the sons of Tyndarus and Hercules, speaks of the true and great God as the firstborn, because nothing was produced before him, but all things sprung from him. He also calls him Phanes, because when as yet there was nothing, he first appeared and came forth from the infinite. And since he was unable to conceive in his mind the origin and nature of this being, he said that he was born from the boundless air. The firstborn, Phaethon, son of the extended air, for he had nothing more to say. He affirms that this being is the parent of all the gods, on whose account he framed the heaven, and provided for his children that they might have a habitation and place of abode in common. He built for immortals an imperishable home. Thus, under the guidance of nature and reason, he understood that there was a power of surpassing greatness which framed heaven and earth. For he could not say that Jupiter was the author of all things, since he was born from Saturn, nor could he say that Saturn himself was their author, since it was reported that he was produced from the heaven. But he did not venture to set up the heaven as the primeval god, because he saw that it was an element of the universe, and must itself have had an author. This consideration led him to that firstborn God, to whom he assigns and gives the first place. Homer was able to give us no information relating to the truth, for he wrote of human rather than divine things. Hesiod was able, for he comprised in the work of one book the generation of the gods. But yet he gave us no information, for he took his commencement not from God the Creator, but from chaos, which is a confused mass of rude and unarranged matter. Whereas he ought first to have explained from what source, at what time, and in what manner chaos itself had begun to exist or to have consistency. Without doubt, as all things were placed in order, arranged and made by some artificer, so matter itself must of necessity have been formed by some being. Who, then, made it except God, to whose power all things are subject? But he shrinks from admitting this, while he dreads the unknown truth. For, as he wished it to appear, it was by the inspiration of the Muses that he poured forth that song on Helicon. But he had come after previous meditation and preparation. Maro was the first of our poets to approach the truth, who thus speaks respecting the highest God, whom he calls mind and spirit. Know first the heaven, the earth, the main, the moon's pale orb, the starry train, are nourished by a soul, a spirit, whose celestial flame glows in each member of the frame and stirs the mighty whole. And lest anyone should happen to be ignorant what that spirit was, which had so much power, he has declared it in another place, saying, "For the deity pervades all lands, the tracts of sea and depth of heaven, the flocks, the herds and men, and all the race of beasts, each at its birth, derive their slender lives from him." Ovid also, in the beginning of his remarkable work, without any disguising of the name, admits that the universe was arranged by God, whom he calls the framer of the world, the artificer of all things. But if either Orpheus or these poets of our country had always maintained what they perceived under the guidance of nature, they would have comprehended the truth and gained the same learning which we follow. But thus far of the poets. Let us come to the philosophers, whose authority is of greater weight, and their judgment more to be relied on, because they are believed to have paid attention, not to matters of fiction, but to the investigation of the truth. Thales of Miletus, who was one of the number of the 7 wise men, and who is said to have been the first of all to inquire respecting natural causes, said that water was the element from which all things were produced, and that God was the mind which formed all things from water. Thus, he placed the material of all things in moisture. He fixed the beginning and cause of their production in God. Pythagoras thus defined the being of God as a soul passing to and fro and diffused through all parts of the universe and through all nature, from which all living creatures which are produced derive their life. Anaxagoras said that God was an infinite mind, which moves by its own power. Antisthenes maintained that the gods of the people were many, but that the God of nature was one only, that is, the fabricator of the whole universe. Cleanthes and Anaximenes assert that the air is the chief deity, and to this opinion our poet has assented. Then Almighty Father Ether descends in fertile showers into the bosom of his joyous spouse, and great himself, mingling with her great body, nourishes all her offspring. Chrysippus speaks of God as a natural power endowed with divine reason, and sometimes as a divine necessity. Zeno also speaks of him as a divine and natural law. The opinion of all these, however uncertain it is, has reference to one point, to their agreement in the existence of one providence. For whether it be nature, or aether, or reason, or mind, or a fatal necessity, or a divine law, or if you term it anything else, it is the same which is called by us God, nor does the diversity of titles prove an obstacle, since by their very signification they all refer to one object. Aristotle, although he is at variance with himself, and both utters and holds sentiments opposed to one another, yet upon the whole bears witness that one mind presides over the universe. Plato, who is judged the wisest of all, plainly and openly maintains the rule of one God, nor does he name him ether or reason or nature, but as he truly is, God, and that this universe, so perfect and wonderful, was fabricated by him. And Cicero, following and imitating him in many instances, frequently acknowledges God and calls him supreme in those books which he wrote on the subject of laws. And he adduces proof that the universe is governed by him when he argues respecting the nature of the gods in this way. Nothing is superior to God. The world must therefore be governed by him. Therefore God is obedient or subject to no nature. Consequently, he himself governs all nature. But what God himself is, he defines in his consolation. Nor can God himself, as he is comprehended by us, be comprehended in any other way than as a mind free and unrestrained, far removed from all mortal materiality, perceiving and moving all things. How often, also, does Aeneas Seneca, who was the keenest Stoic of the Romans, follow up with deserved praise the supreme deity? For when he was discussing the subject of premature death, he said, "You do not understand the authority and majesty of your judge, the ruler of the world, and the God of heaven and of all gods, on whom those deities which we separately worship and honor are dependent." Also in his exhortations, this being, when he was laying the first foundations of the most beautiful fabric, and was commencing this work, than which nature has known nothing greater or better, that all things might serve their own rulers, although he had spread himself out through the whole body, yet he produced gods as ministers of his kingdom. And how many other things like to our own writers did he speak on the subject of God? But these things I put off for the present, because they are more suited to other parts of the subject. At present, it is enough to demonstrate that men of the highest genius touched upon the truth and almost grasped it, had not custom, infatuated by false opinions, carried them back. By which custom they both deemed that there were other gods, and believed that those things which God made for the use of man, as though they were endowed with perception, were to be held and worshipped as gods. Now let us pass to divine testimonies, but I will previously bring forward one which resembles a divine testimony, both on account of its very great antiquity, and because he whom I shall name was taken from men and placed among the gods. According to Cicero, Caius Cotta the pontiff, while disputing against the Stoics concerning superstitions and the variety of opinions which prevail respecting the gods, in order that he might, after the custom of the academics, make everything uncertain, says that there were 5 Mercuries, and having enumerated 4 in order, says that the 5th was he by whom Argus was slain, and that on this account he fled into Egypt, and gave laws and letters to the Egyptians. The Egyptians call him Thoth, and from him the first month of their year, that is, September, received its name among them. He also built a town, which is even now called in Greek Hermopolis, the town of Mercury, and the inhabitants of Phene honor him with religious worship. And although he was a man, yet he was of great antiquity, and most fully imbued with every kind of learning, so that the knowledge of many subjects and arts acquired for him the name of Trismegistus. He wrote books, and those in great numbers, relating to the knowledge of divine things, in which he asserts the majesty of the supreme and only God, and makes mention of him by the same names which we use, God and Father. And that no one might inquire his name, he said that he was without name, and that on account of his very unity he does not require the peculiarity of a name. These are his own words. God is one, but he who is one only does not need a name, for he who is self-existent is without a name. God, therefore, has no name, because he is alone, nor is there any need of a proper name, except in cases where a multitude of persons requires a distinguishing mark, so that you may designate each person by his own mark and appellation. But God, because he is always one, has no peculiar name. It remains for me to bring forward testimonies respecting the sacred responses and predictions, which are much more to be relied upon. For perhaps they against whom we are arguing may think that no credence is to be given to poets, as though they invented fictions, nor to philosophers, inasmuch as they were liable to err, being themselves but men. Marcus Varro, than whom no man of greater learning ever lived, even among the Greeks, much less among the Latins, in those books respecting divine subjects which he addressed to Caius Caesar, the chief pontiff, when he was speaking of the Quindecemviri, says that the Sibylline books were not the production of one Sibyl only, but that they were called by one name Sibylline, because all prophetesses were called by the ancient Sibyls, either from the name of one, the Delphian priestess, or from their proclaiming the counsels of the gods. For in the Aeolic dialect, they used to call the gods by the word Sioi, not Theoi, and for counsel they used the word Boule, not Boule, and so the Sibyl received her name as though Siobule. But he says that the Sibyls were 10 in number, and he enumerated them all under the writers, who wrote an account of each, that the first was from the Persians, and of her Nicanor made mention, who wrote the exploits of Alexander of Macedon, the second of Libya, and of her Euripides makes mention in the prologue of the Lamia, the third of Delphi, concerning whom Chrysippus speaks in that book which he composed concerning divination, the fourth a Cimmerian in Italy, whom Navius mentions in his books of the Punic War, and Piso in his annals, the fifth of Erythraea, whom Apollodorus of Erythraea affirms to have been his own countrywoman, and that she foretold to the Greeks when they were setting out for Ilium, both that Troy was doomed to destruction, and that Homer would write falsehoods, the sixth of Samos, respecting whom Eratosthenes writes that he had found a written notice in the ancient annals of the Samians. The seventh was of Cumae, by name Amalthea, who is termed by some Herophile or Demophile, and they say that she brought 9 books to the king Tarquinius Priscus, and asked for them 300 philippics, and that the king refused so great a price, and derided the madness of the woman, that she, in the sight of the king, burnt 3 of the books, and demanded the same price for those which were left, that Tarquinius much more considered the woman to be mad, and that when she again, having burnt 3 other books, persisted in asking the same price, the king was moved and bought the remaining books for the 300 pieces of gold. And the number of these books was afterwards increased after the rebuilding of the capital, because they were collected from all cities of Italy and Greece, and especially from those of Erythrea, and were brought to Rome under the name of whatever Sibyl they were. Further, that the 8th was from the Hellespont, born in the Trojan territory, in the village of Marpessus, about the town of Gergithus. And Heraclides of Pontus writes that she lived in the times of Solon and Cyrus. The 9th of Phrygia, who gave oracles at Ancyra. The 10th of Tibur, by name Albunia, who is worshipped at Tibur as a goddess, near the banks of the river Anio, in the depths of which her statue is said to have been found, holding in her hand a book. The Senate transferred her oracles into the capital. The predictions of all these Sibyls are both brought forward and esteemed as such, except those of the Cumaean Sibyl, whose books are concealed by the Romans, nor do they consider it lawful for them to be inspected by anyone but the Quindecemviri, and there are separate books, the production of each, but because these are inscribed with the name of the Sibyl, they are believed to be the work of one, and they are confused, nor can the productions of each be distinguished and assigned to their own authors, except in the case of the Erythraean Sibyl, for she both inserted her own true name in her verse, and predicted that she would be called Erythraean, though she was born at Babylon. But we also shall speak of the Sibyl without any distinction, wherever we shall have occasion to use their testimonies. All these Sibyls then proclaim one God, and especially the Erythraean, who is regarded among the others as more celebrated and noble, since Fenestella, a most diligent writer, speaking of the Quindecemviri, says that, after the rebuilding of the capital, Caius Curio, the consul, proposed to the Senate that ambassadors should be sent to Erythrae to search out and bring to Rome the writings of the Sibyl, and that accordingly Publius Gabinius, Marcus Ottocilius, and Lucius Valerius were sent, who conveyed to Rome about 1,000 verses written out by private persons. We have shown before that Varro made the same statement. Now in these verses, which the ambassadors brought to Rome, are these testimonies respecting the one God, one God, who is alone, most mighty, uncreated. This is the only supreme God, who made the heaven and decked it with lights. 2. But there is one only God of preeminent power, who made the heaven and sun and stars and moon and fruitful earth and waves of the water of the sea. And since he alone is the framer of the universe and the artificer of all things of which it consists or which are contained in it, it testifies that he alone ought to be worshipped. 3. Worship him who is alone the ruler of the world, who alone was and is from age to age. Also another Sibyl, whoever she is, when she said that she conveyed the voice of God to men, thus spoke. 4. I am the one only God, and there is no other God.